Hello, hello, hello. What's up? What's up? Once again, this is your host.
Hi.
Hello, Christina. Um, once again, this is Everything Culture, and we have our guest, Christina Chan, with us today. You know what we're doing? We're going to be doing the makings of you. So it's a deep dive to our guest background, a little bit about their traditions, about their beliefs, get a little bit more of an understanding about them personally before we start our episode this upcoming week. But how are you doing today, Christina?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm great. I could complain, but I'm not. I'm truly great. Just trying to keep our head on the swivel, stay sturdy on our beliefs and what we're here to stand for and what the changes we're trying to make. So all
Yes,
that good stuff. But so, have you ever listened to the makings of you?
I have not yet.
It's okay. So don't get too nervous. Let you know these are just questions, okay? If you don't feel
Okay.
comfortable asking them, that's all right. I'm just going to ask the question. I'm not going to give you any type of direction for it. Just have you want to answer it. That's going to be our response. So let's start off for the first question. How would
Okay.
you describe yourself?
I would describe myself as an activist. It's a combination of activist and artist together, combined in one word.
Activist?
Um, yes. So
Okay.
Aivist.
Okay. Activist. I like that.
Yeah.
Hashtag. All right. How would you define your childhood and your upbringing?
hmm. I would say that it was one diversity and one of self discovery, as well as the discovery of my cultural pride. Growing up, I definitely had some difficulties and some conflicts in my life. It was difficult growing up finding that pride to be an Asian, just because growing up in such a, I guess, in such a white area in Seattle. So born and raised in South Seattle. And just growing up in such a white area and not really seeing a lot of representation across media, across different, um, just different areas, especially in Seattle itself. Really, the only representation I saw of myself was in Chinatown. And so that was really difficult to really try to discover like my own pride as being a Chinese woman. Just because that representation wasn't there. A lot of what I saw was white people, and so it really made me like really think about like who I was in terms of ethnicity, but who I was in terms of being a Chinese American woman in the U.S. And so it wasn't really until I was um, when I went to Franklin High School, which is located in the South End, and from there, it was a 90% POCs, about a third Asian, a third Black, and then the rest were just a variety of different ethnicities, maybe like 8% white. It really gave me the opportunity to learn about different cultures, and especially to be just around my people in such a white city. So that was where I really started to really develop pride for my own culture, because a lot of my peers and I were on that self discovery at
Mhm.
along the same time, because we are all growing up in such a white city. And in particular, in the neighborhood that I was growing up with, high policing, high incarceration rates. So, my peers and I, we really developed that resiliency too together, because we had to overcome a lot of these things together. And in order to make it in Seattle, you really have to stick together,
Yeah.
because of how white the city is, and how just different ways that white superiority has taken over the city, gentrification. We as people of color really have to stick together. That's really something that I've learned over the years. We really have to stick together and be in solidarity, in order to stay in Seattle, and to really, really be able to engage and keep our culture alive.
All right. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Where do you consider home?
Most definitely, most definitely the South End, and Chinatown. I can spend my whole day in Chinatown. And the amazing thing about Chinatown is that it's not just Chinese restaurants. And I should correct myself. It's Chinatown International District.
Okay.
So it can be called either way, but it was changed to International District because it's not just Chinese restaurants and businesses. We have Japantown, Little Saigon, we have Vietnamese, Korean, and we also have African businesses down there too, and Middle Eastern type businesses. And so it's really a combination of all these different ethnicities, and they found a place to be in this neighborhood. And so I can spend my whole day there, and where I can go and go from Awajimaya, which is the Japanese supermarket, to my favorite bookstore, Japanese bookstore in Awajimaya. Then I can stop by Gonbei, which is my friend's business, Toho Seafood Restaurant, Purple Dot Cafe, Hong Kong Bistro, and then I will end at either King's or Casa. So I can stay like my whole day. I mean, parking is expensive, but I can stay the whole day in Chinatown. But also really have to show love to my neighborhood of the South End, just because it's historically Seattle has a lot of discriminatory practices that has led people of color to live in certain areas, such as International District and South Seattle and Central District. Especially with redlining, some of the things that they did with like land deeds and house deeds, and where they literally specifically say that people of color cannot live there. It's still out there. These deeds are still out there. Literally. I had a professor at UW who told us a few years ago that they had to deal with that, and where the house that they were trying to purchase literally said people cannot live here. So, the people of color historically have lived in South Seattle Central District, so the African American community in Central District, where it used to be like 70% African American, and a lot of the Chinese immigrants, and which it grew to have all different types of ethnicities in Chinatown. But with the Central District, with gentrification, it has pushed out the majority of Black people out. So there's maybe only 20 Black people in Central District now. It's crazy, and they're doing the same thing for South Seattle too.
Okay. And how many what percentage of Black people? I'm sorry, you kind of cut out right there.
About, I can't say for sure the percentage, but it's like 15 to 25% now, compared to the 70%. And it has been a process since the 1980s. It's all began in the 1980s, and now it's completely changed Central District, and it's changing South Seattle now too.
Okay, thank you. So, next question. What are or what were your beliefs?
Beliefs in terms of just any beliefs?
You pick once again.
It's definitely a combination of different things. I'm Buddhist, so I live in a very spiritual, a lot of my beliefs are very spiritual, and also based off of human connection as well. I treat everyone differently, but still with compassion and love. And a lot of my beliefs are based off of just me growing up in such a diverse area, and being able to connect with a lot of different people based off of their cultures and their beliefs. For me, it's about how can I meet someone where, how are we different, but how are we similar? And so that's something that I definitely learned growing up with so many different cultures around me, is the different ways, for example, the different ways of how systemic oppression has impacted us as people of color is different based off of like ethnicity, right? If you're like gender, right? but it still has an impact on all of us. So a lot of my beliefs are based off of that combination of like finding solidarity with someone and that human connection of how different we are, but also how similar we are as well too.
Love it. That's like exactly what we're here to do. Exactly. Um, what what was an impactful moment in your life?
An impactful moment in my life, I think it was watching my very, very good friend. And as I mentioned before, I went to Franklin High School, and then during that time, especially in the neighborhood, high policing, high incarceration rates, community violence, which is still prevalent to this day, but it looks different because gentrification is pushing people out. So you can kind of see that even in youth incarceration, even though it's still kind of like it has gone down, we also kind of have to see that the population is also moving down south too. And gentrification is not solving any issues. It's really just pushing and expanding and making the issues very different and very and impacting different communities in different ways because people are being pushed out.
Love it. Thank you for sharing once again. Going on to our next question. How do you define joy?
In so many different ways. And a lot of it is through just living and enjoying life with friends, and it can be in the most simple manners ever. And one of the things, um, because I'm an activist, and because a lot of so many of my friends are, like, there's so many different hard topics that we deal with every day, but we also really value the time and when we like hang out with each other, just finding that human connection and that solidarity and just like trying to enjoy life as much as we can. Just simply living as a person of color is a sign of protest. Us dancing is a sign of protest. Us having fun out there in our community in different places, that's a sign of protest as well. And because essentially the system is set up to keep us down. And if we continue to uplift ourselves and continue to fight and continue to live and just to live is a protest. Is something against what the system is trying to keep us down for. And so joy to me enjoying things can be so many different, can have so many different meanings for me, but a lot of it is, to the very simple terms, is finding the happiness in the very simple things that we can do every day, and doing it with friends and family and community.
All right. Friends, family, community. Who were and who are your role models?
I mean, this is a tough question. Um, I'll speak about one of my sisters, Allison. She's definitely one of my role models. Um, I call her my sister. I met her from working at a nonprofit down in Bellevue, and she's one of I. We just talk a lot about different things, and I always feel comfortable with sharing with her like what I'm going through, and she really gives me a lot of like great advice. And I think something that I really admire for her is that you know as as a Black woman, she's definitely dealing with a lot of things right now, but she always keeps pushing. And she's going through a lot right now, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement. And but she continues to still just be strong as much as she can, and that in itself is very inspiring for me to see.
What's her name one more time?
Allison.
Allison. Shout out to Allison. And that's a beautiful thing when you say you can have a peer to be a role model of yours as well. Okay.
Yeah, and she is older.
Okay.
Um,
But it's
yeah,
still, knowing your role models personally, I think that's a caveat. And that's a real
mm,
cool aspect of it. Um, what is a quote that you live by?
I don't necessarily live by a certain quote. I think when it comes to, at the end of the day, it'll be like three words, just peace and love. And it really just stemmed into who I am as a Buddhist, and my spirituality. And it's that type of liberation that I look for as a person of color, especially in the world that we live in right now. Um, I would say peace and love, but also peace of mind, both of them.
Okay. Those are quotes. That'll work pretty well. If you just write them down, that will suffice. Okay. Now, this doesn't have to mean you're dying anything, but let's just say it don't mean you're on death row. Let's say that. But let's say you had a last meal. You know, this is going to be the last thing you're going to eat. What would it be, and who would prepare it for you?
It will definitely be my dad because he is a very good cook, but also because I just really love my dad. My dad is I would say he's definitely an older version of me, in terms of spirituality, and just like that kindness and compassion. He has a very similar way of um, making connections with people. We're very similar in that way,
Okay.
but with that language barrier. Um,
Okay.
he's an immigrant. He's refugee from China, and it will be duck, Chinese duck,
Chinese duck.
Chinese
Okay.
duck, um, in this white bread, and you can put sauce and onions on it. So good.
Okay, I'm gonna have to check that out. Like, since
It's called
the
Peking duck. Yeah.
oh, I've heard of Peking duck.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Peking duck last meal by father, like your dad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How would you like people to remember you, Christina?
I don't necessarily want people to. I want them to remember the work that I do, but I don't. I don't really. I like to be in the background. I don't like really fame. I I rather just them remember me as someone like by the work that I do, whether that's like through my art, um, whether that's through my activism work.
Hey, love it, love it. How would you describe your culture? I know, deep, right?
That's so deep and hmm. I would describe my culture as one of community and collectiveness that also has room for growth. Um, and then I can really only speak about the Chinese American culture, just like in Seattle, just because that's where I grew up my whole life. I can't really speak upon, the culture down in China because that's completely, it's different. There's some similarities, but essentially still different. And especially in America, immigrants tend to stick with other immigrants. And so you'll see that in different geographic areas, there's different like collective people together because that's how we are like resilient. We have to stick together and get the resources together so that way we can overcome like whatever obstacles there are. And so especially with the Chinese community here, there is Chinatown International District, Beacon Hill, there's a lot of Chinese people who live there. But definitely we're very family oriented. So we tend to stick together, even in the households. So like in America, when white people grow up, like that, there's that ideal that like when you're 18, you can move out of the house. But we don't really do that. I even though I have my own place, I like half the time I'm on my parents too. My room is still there. It's my way of finding like because I'm somewhat individualistic because I grew up here, but also very community oriented, family oriented because I still stay with my parents. Because we a lot of us as families move together. Room of growth is definitely want to address discrimination and there's a lot of just like anti-black sentiment just deeply rooted in our culture. That's definitely where I see a lot of room of growth. A lot. It needs to be addressed. And it's been worse in China. Um, I would say though, there's definitely like Asian Americans who have grown up who have tried to address it, but there's a lot of different arenas here, especially with like older immigrants. That it's just like it's harder to address because it's more deeply rooted. And I still blame everything on white colonialism here. But it's sometimes difficult to address. Even in my own family, I've had to address it in very different ways. And it has taken, for example, my cousin to marry a black man for some of my older relatives to finally kind of like change their perception. So it takes a lot. It's going to take a lot too. And it's going to take a lot of push for that area of growth there.
Well, that is a lot of information about your culture that we love to have, especially being specific to the Chinese American culture. We greatly appreciate you. And do you like to shout out any of your handles right now before we end the making some
Oh,
music?
yes. Definitely my business account, which is on Instagram, Dyme Designs, DYME Designs.
Okay. All right. So, everybody, you just heard a little bit about Christina Chan, our upcoming guest on our episode this upcoming week. But make sure to check her out. Make sure to check us out and check out the conversation. See y'all later. Peace.